Welcome to Mad Props. I am your host, Chris Schnabel, and today we have Zach Taylor joining the show. He is a NASA engineer, which we get very much into, and also the author of Rockstar Echoes, a story about music, fame, business side of things, following two characters throughout their story. One gets pushed into one direction, another gets pushed into another direction. One kind of gets thrust into fame. The other one has to build their way into what they're trying to become and all the things that happen in between. So you're not going to want to miss that. We also talk a lot about being a NASA engineer because I am very interested in that because I know nothing about any of that stuff. I'm not smart enough to know anything about any of that stuff. And he is, because he is a NASA engineer. So we talk a lot about that as well. You're not going to miss any of that. Before we get started, make sure you are subscribed to the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right below. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, wherever, hit that follow button, give us 5 stars, give us some comments, all that stuff. I will beg for that until the day I die because I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear about what you think of the podcast. So leave some comments below. Even if you're just a friend of the guest, leave a comment and let them know you were here because I'm sure they'll appreciate it as much as I do that you are listening to their stuff. Make sure you follow us on social media, Mad Props Pod, anywhere you get your social media, whether that's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, or Twitter. You can find us there, Mad Props Pod on YouTube. If you are not watching us on YouTube, that's where you can find it. Hit that subscribe button there as well. You can find me at Chris Schnabel on TikTok or at Chris.Schnabel on TikTok or at Chris Schnabel on Instagram. Find me there. I'm also usually collabed with the posts from Mad Props. So if you're following Mad Props, you'll also be able to follow me. Before we start the podcast, I would like to announce that I will be at Comicpalooza. I will be there as Mad Props doing panels and all this other stuff. So you're not going to want, if you're going to be in Houston, May 22nd through the 24th, you're going to want to hit me up because I'll be there talking about Mad Props and doing things with Mad Props. Not sure yet, but we might have a special guest on the 23rd to do a kind of a live podcast. So you're not going to want to miss that because that'll be awesome. You can also see some really cool people. Steve Burns, Steve from Blue's Clues will be there. Charlie Cox of Daredevil, Vincent D'Onofrio from Daredevil will also be there. So you can meet those guys. Lawrence Fishburne is going to be there. Edward James Olmos is going to be there. A lot of really cool names are going to be there. So if you are in Houston or if you're going to Comicpalooza, hit me up because I'll be there too. And maybe while you're there, you can meet some really cool people and not just me because I'm not really that cool of a person. But if you're listening to this, that means you listen to my podcast and I would love to meet you. So if you're listening and you're going to be there, let me know. I really appreciate that. We're not going to waste too much more time. We're going to get right into the podcast here because we go for a good amount of time and it's a really good listen. I don't want you guys to listen to me talk the whole time. I want you to listen to my guest talk the whole time. That's why he's here, right? Thank you guys so much. Make sure you follow us. Make sure you go to Comicpalooza and tell me you're going to be there. And let's get started with this. Roll that intro. It is Mad Props. Let's go. Zach, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for being here on your busy schedule. I mean, you're doing NASA, you're doing books. It's got to be crazy out there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a really interesting story how we kind of came across each other, how randomness just kind of finds each other. And hey, look, through Reddit, we found each other. So here we are.
People will be surprised how many guests I do find through Reddit. And some of them are ones you're like, oh, I know that name. And some of them are authors. Some of them are musicians. Just people want to be found on Reddit because that's the community right there. You have your community right there. But thank you so much for joining. So you have your before we get into your book and things about your book, I do want to talk a little bit about the NASA and getting into it. So let's go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay.
How do you get into NASA? What did you decide? Like, I'm going to be a NASA engineer because that's just not a job that anyone could pick up.
Yeah, that's a great question. We get asked that a whole lot. My journey is similar to a lot of people around here, especially being born and raised kind of in the Huntsville area, the Rocket City. And my father worked for NASA for his entire career, but really it goes back to Challenger, and way back in 1986. And even though I was 3.5 years old, seeing that space shuttle explode on live TV shocked everybody, right? It changed everybody's perspective of spaceflight. But when you're a child whose father was in those trenches, I mean, he worked on solid rocket motors, he still does. that was a really formative event for me, and I was obsessed with that as a child. The irony of that is that when I went to college, and I knew I wanted to be an engineer, but it was more financially based. My granddad pulled up, two things, and one of them was the demand. What are jobs that are going to be in the highest demand when you graduate? And then he pulled up another one that had the highest salaries out of school, and those lines crossed at mechanical engineer. So I actually didn't want to work for NASA. My dad did it. My granddad was part of this industry, and our family roots even go back to the quick airplane. We can talk about that later, but I got an opportunity at the time to work on contract while I was in college to give me a little, have income. We had a child already, and when I graduated, I got that job offer. So I wouldn't. I'm definitely not a nepo baby. I've done everything in my career to separate myself, and I've been very successful with being a Silver Snoopy recipient, and I've got a lot of director's commendations and things like that. But I think it really just goes back to, the heritage, right, of being a part of that family. And I tell people that come work for us from other industries, and we get tons of those people. Some people want to come work for NASA, and some people just want to have a paycheck. And I say, hey, this, human spaceflight is something that once it gets into your blood and you experience it, you're forever changed, and you'll never want to do anything else. So, I've spent 18 years in this career. I don't have any ambition of doing anything else.
So you go in every day and you're just like, you love what you're doing every day. Is there a lot of pressure under your job though, with how, I mean, so much goes into what you're doing, especially the engineering part of it?
Yeah, the first 14 years of my career were in non-destructive evaluations, so using eddy current, X-ray, ultrasound to verify the health of the parts and ensure the safety of our astronauts. And I got to work on a ton of that stuff. That was stressful, right? Early part of my career working space shuttle, one of the last things we did following the Columbia disaster was checking out the foam on the external tank, which was the cause of that incident. And so, I was a 20-something-year-old kid, and my signature was one of the last signatures that we decided, hey, we feel good about the situation. So there was stress there. Having transitioned into a new role of managing a technician workforce, it is stressful because NASA is going through a massive change right now, where we're bringing so much of the work back into house that we had contracted out, and making sure I've spent the first 4 years of my career making sure we had enough work for these technicians, and that was one challenge. And coming up with a way to operate my facility as kind of a standalone business. We have a business model to make it self-sufficient and be a great return for taxpayer dollars. And with these changes, especially in the last 18 months, the stress has really changed, where now I'm more worried about like making schedules, but primarily the stress levels that are being put on to the men and women that actually make the parts. They've got families too. And so that's been a huge thing, is where we were worried about not enough work. Now we're worried about having too much work. So definitely stressful.
And I want to go back to that too. You said your facility. So do you own the whole facility, and how do you get to that? Is it like almost like franchised out, or did you go so many years along that you're like, all right, now it's time for me to have my own thing, or did you get moved up to that position?
So that's a great question. So COVID, hit. We all dealt with COVID in different ways, and teleworking became a real thing. And for somebody that is a hands-on engineer, like I've spent most of my career, I was really struggling with that. And an opportunity came up in this facility. And so, at times, this manufacturing facility has had over 100 technicians. It's been greatly de-scoped over the years, and they were looking for a new manager for it. And I had a fair amount of fabrication experience from having worked in a machine shop, and then also having been in non-destructive evaluation, where you're working hand in hand with those people. But there came this, it was called a detail, right? It's an opportunity for you to go do a job for a little bit, get some experience. I did that. And the reason I did that was because I was tired of sitting at home. I couldn't do it. Like I know that it's great for a lot of people. It wasn't great for me. And I felt like, this was an opportunity. So I did that, which meant that I had to come on site every day, which is what I wanted. And I loved it. And it was right up my alley, because it is very fast paced. It's very stressful, but it's very hands on. The amount of hardware that we get to see for the space station, for SLS, for Orion. And so I did a good job in that detail. I got offered the job, and that job has grown exponentially. So NASA's an interesting place to work because we're fairly set on, it's called stovepiping, right? So it can be difficult for people to get opportunities, and they don't come around a ton. So I jumped at it. It was the best move that I've ever made for my career.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I am like completely amateur when it comes to anything NASA. I know that they fly rockets, and I know even the Huntsville thing. I knew Rocket City, but I told you off air. I know because the Rocket City Trash
Right.
Pandas. I didn't even know that was like a NASA base. I know the one in Houston. I know the one in Kennedy Space Center as well. So all this stuff that you're telling me is just so new to me because I had no idea about any of this stuff. How often do you find that? Like people are like, "Oh, I didn't even know Huntsville was like a
All the time.
base."
Yeah, all the time. So, I'm fortunate enough to do a little bit of traveling. Me and my wife like to go to Jamaica, for example, to Couples in a Grill in particular, and that's always a fascinating experience. We try to go, at least every other year, and so you get to see people from obviously other parts of our country, but we usually go during holiday, for Europe, and so um, first of all, Alabama has a reputation, right? And so the first thing where are you from? That's always the first question. Okay, so where are you from? What do you do? So where are you from? Alabama. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not going to get into it, but I think that there's a lot of stereotypes that exist with Alabama. And then they say, well, what do you do? And I tell them, and that's always, some of them will think about space camp. They'll think about the Space and Rocket Center, and you say, well, there's a reason why the Rocket Center is in Huntsville. It's because Huntsville is the Rocket City, and so that's always an interesting conversation to have with people. And then, of course, I'm not mean about it or anything, but I always like to point out that Huntsville is an amazing city. It's a melting pot. It has the highest per capita PhD of anywhere on the planet. Just we have people that move here for our jobs, whether it's the FBI, whether it's for Space and Missile Defense Command, whether it's for the Redstone Arsenal, and of course now we have Blue Origin that's here, and pieces of SpaceX, things like that. So that's always a great conversation, a fun conversation to have with people.
How often do you get to go to the launches? We talked a little bit off that you didn't get to go to the last one, but do you get to go to most of the launches that happen? How does that go? Is it just like you're a spectator, or are you there to really make sure things are going okay?
During the end of the shuttle program, I was going to most of the launches down there. I wasn't in a control room or anything like that. I was inside the vehicle assembly building, which is that NASA vehicle or NASA building you see in Apollo 13 if you need some perspective. So, inspecting parts of the shuttle right before its flight. And of course, we haven't had a lot of launches since then. We've only had really, we had Ares 1X, didn't get to go that one. That was back in 2015, I think. But the Artemis 1, the Artemis 2, I didn't get to go to, which there was a reason for that. I have 3 kids, I have other hobbies, and in this case, I coach high school softball, and that's the meat of our season. So we had plans to watch it during the first launch window. We had a leak on the pad that they fixed. And so for the second one, I think we had like 4 games that week. And I was like, I guess I'm not going to be able to watch it. But that did allow me to watch the launch with friends and family. And Huntsville put on an amazing show. Any venue that you wanted to go to, whether it was Palm Springs Park, or if it was Back Forty Bruin, which is where we watched it, or wherever you wanted to go, there was a huge watch party. So I personally loved being able to experience that with people that are not part of NASA, but know it and love it. So, but hopefully in the future, going to get to be a part of that. I've got a ton of coworkers that kind of started the same time that I did at NASA that are about my age that were controllers in the control room. So, just not me, not yet.
Do you recommend people to go watch one? I saw one when I was really young. It might have even been around, not 2015, maybe the one before that.
Mm-hmm.
I got to see one out of the Kennedy Space Center. Do you recommend people to like actually take a trip to go watch one of these? Because it's something that doesn't happen. It's pretty rare that they launch anymore.
Yeah, no, whether it's SpaceX, whether it's Blue Origin, whether it's NASA, no, I absolutely believe that people should go watch that. So, I have a younger engineer that I consider myself my mentor, but we fish together. He actually mentors me in competitive bass fishing because he fished in college. He's a great fisherman, and he's from Priceville, which is down the road, but he didn't really know anything about NASA. He had a job, right? He got a job offer out of college, came and worked for NASA, and he loves his job. Don't misunderstand, but he had the opportunity to go watch the Artemis 2 launch, and I told him, hey, take the family and all that, and he listened. And so right before launch, he texted me and he was like, I'm so excited. And I said, buddy, let me tell you something. You're going to watch this thing come off the pad and it's going to change how your brain is wired, because that's something that you worked on and you have stake in that. And he did. He texted me back later and said, I'll never look at things the same.
Yeah, that's got to be. I mean, I work in content, and seeing something like go big or go on TV, you're just like, wow, as a part of that, it's a whole different type of feeling. It has to be when it's like it's a rocket going into space carrying people. Like it's got to be something. I don't even know how you would describe a feeling like that. Like you worked on that, and you are a piece of that. Like something you've done is making history every single time something goes up like that. I
Yeah.
can't even imagine what that feels like.
Yeah, it's interesting. There hasn't been a lot of studies on us people that stay on the ground, but there has been studies on astronauts. And while we haven't been to the moon, since the 70s, this is the first time that we put people around the moon, and it was a fantastic opportunity because we had our first woman that went around the moon, we had our first African American that went around the moon, and we had the first Canadian ever. So that was really important to do. But there's been a lot of studies on the astronauts and on the Apollo program on when they saw the Earth for the first time from the moon, that it fundamentally changed how they thought. And that it's easy to downplay that, right? But uh, there's reality to it, and because of technology that we have now, we all got to experience that. And if you can't see that Orion spacecraft come around the moon and see the Earth appear, which we got to do that. This is really the first time that we've gotten to do that it live, right? And I've talked to people, and they talked about like that puts things in perspective when you can see the entire world. Every human being that's ever been, born, has lived and died, is still on this rock that we call Earth, and it proves how small we truly are in our struggles, how small they truly are, and how we should think differently.
For people that like just don't understand, and I mean I'm included, but not for the reason some people are. What makes it so difficult to do? I mean, this is the first time we've been around the moon. There's not really much travel to the moon. What makes that travel so difficult to pull off for NASA?
Well, it's really a physics problem, right? And it's a financial problem. You know, I'd have to go back. I did a lot of courses and stuff on this, so I'm not going to get quoted on it because somebody will tell me I'm wrong. But for every pound that you need to take with you to the moon, the amount of propellant that you need to get there is exponential, and so you can't. The easy answer is, well, you just build bigger rockets. Well, rockets are really expensive, and the main reason that we haven't done it is because, back in the Apollo program, the amount of federal funding we were getting to go accomplish that was a large percentage of the GDP for the United States. And we don't have that anymore. In fact, it's interesting because I looked up the other day how much federal money moves through Redstone Arsenal, right? So Huntsville does a lot, right? So we manage all the helicopters that the Army uses. The Redstone does so much, and there's $54 billion a year that go through Redstone Arsenal every year. $54 billion through Huntsville alone. NASA's entire budget per year is $27 billion. So we get half the amount of money that one military base gets, and it's really, really hard to be successful when you don't have the money to go be successful. And then there's a lot of political issues, not issues, political challenges that go with that, from changing over administrations and directions. So it all kind of plays a part.
Yeah, a little bit of the funding, a little bit of like the mission's not there because it keeps turning over. So like even when you're making that momentum, and for people that don't know, I mean, it takes a long time to get this mission even there.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not like, oh, we're gonna go to the moon, and then later that year they do it. It takes years and years. So if you have it going from one to the next, and this new person comes in and is like, yeah, that's not my goal. That's not what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
It just now stops it for that much longer.
Yeah, no, the smallest things that don't seem important can change things. Your mission may have been, we're going to build SLS to build a space station in the moon's orbit, right? And then we're gonna use that space station and go from there down to the moon, and then just simply changing that to we're gonna do a direct launch. You know, the problem that I think that we've had, and this is just Zach's opinion, is that we continually try to design a heavy lift platform like SLS to do a lot of things well. But when you do that, it does nothing great, and it has its inherent challenges. And so, and it, like I said, but it really comes down to the financial aspect of it, and with it's a really hard sell for the American taxpayer right now. And I see it every day that we can't afford to feed people or whatever. And meanwhile, we can send 4 people around the moon and they do nothing. And so it's all about perspective. And one of the things that I love about doing podcasts with people like you, it is to kind of try to talk about like why this stuff really matters, and how it does benefit everybody in the end, that we can't be short-sighted, that humanity was meant to explore. We can't quit. We have to continue. We live in a fixed resource environment. The earth only has so many resources, and we've not done a great job as humanity on managing those. And so out there, wherever out there is an infinite amount of resources. We've just got to figure out ways to get there.
Yeah, I'm right on board with you. I mean, yeah, it can be expensive, and there's things that can be paid for on the Earth we're currently on. But the further we go, the more groundbreaking that is, and the closer we are to expanding ourselves. Like when this planet eventually dries up or whatever, we need to find resources somewhere else to continue to survive. So every time we go around the moon, that's a little further that we've been able to go, which is just a huge milestone. But there's always going to be the naysayers, and there's always going to be the people that are going against it.
There's still people that think that we never went to the moon. I mean, in the
first place.
Yeah, and I'm not going to beat up on them. People have to do their own research and believe what they want to believe. If you don't believe it, get a telescope and look up there for yourself. It's there.
Yes, you can see it every single day if you want. Right when the sun goes down, there's a sun too. For those people that don't believe that, it comes up every single day. I feel like related but unrelated, because you just said people believe they don't go to the moon. That like time frame of like maybe the mid 50s to the mid 70s was the prime conspiracy theory time. All the conspiracy theory, that was one of them that comes out of it. JFK comes out of it. A lot of conspiracy theories came out of that time frame. And I think it was just because people wanted to go against the norm. Like they wanted to go, like we still see it today, but there's just cameras everywhere and there's so much evidence of things. You can make a conspiracy theory, but it's easier to disprove. There wasn't as much that you could disprove back then because there wasn't as many. I mean, there's really one camera shot of the JFK thing, right? So like you can only study that one camera. A new angle just came out of him, like them rushing to the hospital and stuff. But like, it's just funny that time frame really was like conspiracy central from like the mid 50s to the mid 70s. Like all of them really came out around that time.
Yeah, but look how the country was changing too, right? And there's so many things that happened that changed Americans forever. JFK is obviously one of them, and the moon landing's one, and Vietnam is another one. And so it's really easy to allow a single data point. Is when you look at one and you're like, I mean, I'm not sure that really happened, but sometimes I think you have to take a step back and say, the world, and especially this country, culturally, especially was in such an amazing state of flux that, it's almost, it feels like it's not possible that it changed as much as it did, and so it makes people want to pull those strings, right? So
yeah. No, we've never been, most everyone's never been that accustomed to change. Like when change happens, they get worried, they get scared. Even now, people like, you're moving to another state. Like there's all these worries, all these scares. It's like the same thing, but magnified. People don't like change. And when change happens, you have to figure out how it stays the same, or why, why would we change? Everything is great right now, but that wasn't always the case. I don't want to take the whole time up talking about NASA. So I'm going to take a hard left turn here because I could just keep going. This is also interesting to me because like, I'm just, like I said, such a novice with this. Like, I don't really know much about it. So it's also interesting. But we're going to take a hard left because you sent me a copy of your book, Rockstar Echoes, and it is not NASA related. Nope. So I want to get more into that. It's more music related. First of all, what made you want to write a book in the first place at all? What made you want to do this at all?
So, I've always been kind of an avid writer, even as a child. And then as a young adult, I did a lot of blogging on competitive bass fishing because it was something I loved. I've always wanted to be a science fiction writer. but life kind of got in the way. We had 3 kids, and I had a career, and kids play sports and all that kind of other kind of stuff. But for me, there was 2 things that kind of happened. Um, my youngest child got the opportunity to write a book through a school program and have it published, and everybody around me knew that I wanted to be a writer, and I had been writing. And when that happened, and it wasn't I can't let my son outdo me or anything like that, but it just proved like that this was, it's not an easy process. Make no mistakes. Writing and publishing is actually fairly easy. Doing it successfully to the standard that I wanted to do it is very, very hard. But I wanted to do science fiction. And I had some great ideas for, because science fiction is supposed to make you think about things, politically, culturally, things like that. You use science fiction and space and spaceships as your vehicle, quite literally, for expressing an idea. And I wanted to do that. But in this case, COVID really changed something for me. One was that while I do love music, I had never really cared about live performances. And we used to have a big rock festival here in Huntsville called Big Spring Jam. So when growing up, we got 3 straight days of some of the biggest acts in the country. And, I kind of got my fill of that. And so as an adult, when we quit having that, live music just kind of fell off the radar. And right before COVID happened, for I guess it was my 39th birthday, my wife got me tickets to see our favorite band, Incubus, play at the Coca-Cola Roxy in Atlanta. And it was the 20th anniversary of their Make Yourself album, which was our favorite album when we were dating in high school. And watching them perform that live, and then immediately going into COVID, and it felt like, and I know people were worried about starving, and they were worried about their health and everything, and that's valid. For me, it was, well, what if this is life forever? And watching these artists not perform never happens again. And so music was on my mind a lot at that point. And I had a couple of dreams in that period of time that really struck me. And just kind of driving to work one day, I was like, hey, I think that you have a really good idea for a book. And that book, wrote it. It turned into 2 books that were open-ended, and then it kept growing and growing and growing. So I really started focusing on Echoes at that point, and decided that I was going to get serious. So that's kind of how that started.
And this was published in 2025, so it's about 4 years of writing before you get to the point where you can publish it?
Yeah, it was done in 2025. It came out January 13th, 2026. Yeah, I want to say it was probably 18 to 24 months. I don't remember, because I would write a lot, and then I'd put it to the side, and I'd come back, because I wasn't really sure how serious I wanted to be with it. At first I thought it was a great idea, and it was one of those things, like I was going to write it, put it to the side, and if time ever permitted, that, maybe I'd look at publishing it. I always intended on publishing it, because I thought that, especially I began writing before Daisy Jones and the Six became a show. I think it was on Amazon. It was a platform. But I hadn't read Taylor Jenkins Reid Daisy Jones and the Six. But when it became successful, I mean, I looked at it and said, and no offense to that book, it's a great book, and it's going to always outsell me or whatever. But, I said, I think that I can write a darker version of that, a more modern version, and a version that says something culturally, because those were the ideas that came out of this book. So yeah, I worked on it a long time, but honestly, the editing process, the cover design, the interior design, all those things took probably as much time to do it the way I wanted to do it than it took writing it.
And was all of it done yourself? Did you outsource anything? And what was the publishing process like to actually get it out there and get it as a published book?
So, I won't say that there's a lot of gatekeeping, because there's plenty of resources that tell you how to do this. But for me professionally, when you don't have a capability, we don't go fumbling around. Like if we need a very specific machining capability, right? We don't go fumbling around to try to figure it out. We look out in the industry and we find the experts and we bring them in and we learn what we can from them. So I applied that to this book. I am not an artist. And I did not want to use some AI cover. I did, so I said, I'm going to hire a professional. I'm going to do it right. And of course I did that. I used a Readsy, which is a website and an app where it allows you to find and vet professionals It is quite expensive, to be honest with you, with lesson learned. But I decided, I was like, I'm not going to let money stop me from doing something that I wanted to do. And that's something that I had that ability that most authors don't have. Most authors just don't have, just quote unquote disposable income, but I kind of do. So, I hired a professional for the cover, and she said, well, who's doing your interior design? And I said, what is interior design? And I thought, well, she's talking about like margins and font size. And she was like,
Yeah.
no, it can be, but if you want to be experimental and you want to make your work unique and you want to make negative space say something, or if you want to make, how your paragraphs start say something, you want to control the reader's process, then you need to have a good interior designer. So I did that as well. Hired a professional to do that. So yeah, I worked with professionals on this, and it shows, I think.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I was wondering if you did it all yourself or if you had any advice or anything like that. So you get it through all the professionals. How do you now get it to publish? Is there a company you work through, or did you have to shop at the places?
So typically, and this is almost a fact. I mean, I can pretty much state it's a fact that a debut independent author is not going to be published by the traditional Big Five. They're not interested. There's too many published authors out there with proven work. So yeah, you can go out and try to get your book in the hands of agents, because you have to find an agent. That agent has to take you on. Then that agent has to go find a publisher. And so that's the traditional route. And it can take, I met an author at an event, came to one of my events, as a matter of fact. They wanted to talk to me about being an independent author. And, it took her 2 years to get signed by an agent. And okay, great. So when you get published, it goes, well, the agent hadn't even found a publisher yet. So, that's one of those things that, like, I knew going in that doing the traditional route wasn't going to happen. So because of that, we decided to go with the other route, which is, publishing through Ingram Spark, which is where all distributors get their books. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, everybody orders their copies through Ingram Spark. But you as an independent author can also have them as your distributor. So we set up there. We set up on KDP, on Amazon. I did have to hire a gentleman from San Francisco area, the Bay Area, who had a lot of experience on the upload process, because I had read how terrible that experience was on getting everything right. Great money. Hey, I like I said, I didn't want to fumble with anything. Once I had written a book that I felt was super complicated, it is a dense book. It's a thinker's book. A lot went into it. I honestly was exhausted, and I was willing to pay for people to just take care of that for me. But I also learned the process of doing that. So, at least that was my way of doing it. And I still skipped some steps, honestly. So, but that's how we went about it.
So in the book, there's two separate sides of it. There's the one person's put into fame, mm-hmm. and the other person is kind of more on the raw, like trying to get that fame. So where did the story come from? What was the inspiration for the story overall?
So initially, the story centered around Klein Thomas and his falling into becoming the new frontman for an iconic band like Aberdeen, and replacing an icon like Lloyd Brandon, which is something that I've been fascinated with for a long time, because we've seen that a lot, especially in 90s grunge music, because so many of our frontmen die from addiction in particular. So, you look at Andy Wood, you look at Lane Staley, you look at Chris Cornell, you look at Scott Weiland. These are pillars for me.
The story really reminded me, honestly, of Journey.
Journey. So go
Steve
back
Perry
to Journey.
Going out, and then them finding the new guy on YouTube, mm-hmm. and him kind of being thrusted in from a YouTube singer to the lead man of Journey.
Yeah, and we've seen that several other times, whether it's Adam Levine playing with Queen. Mm-hmm. We've got John Mayer with the Grateful Dead. But for me, so Stone Temple Pilots and Alice in Chains were the two that I drew the most inspiration from, because I've seen them multiple times with their new frontmen, William Duvall and Jeff Good. And I was fascinated with like what that felt like. I read Reddit like everybody else. I read, YouTube comments, and I just thought like, and that was the impetus for telling this story, was that I hadn't heard it from their perspective. Nobody has really talked about what that's like, right? Genesis is another band where Phil Collins, was a drummer, not a singer. And so he did write a book about that a little bit, but I wanted to explore what it was like for somebody that really wasn't in the industry already, right? And so
Yeah.
that was kind of the impetus for Klein, and I also wanted to explore a lot of the pressures that would bring on for somebody that was already emotionally compromised. And he looked at this as a way out, right? So my life sucks. I've gone through a divorce. I'm not happy in my career, and I had this voice that I've never taken seriously, and now I get this opportunity. And so he jumps into it with both feet, just looking for a change. And he says that it's about his best friend Eddie Cornell. He says it's about all these other things, but really it's about, hey, I just want to be great at something, which is something that I really identify with, because I've not been great at anything in my life, and I've constantly been seeking that. And that's actually it's not a Zach thing. That's a generational thing, right? Especially for my generation of, we've gone through the period of the least economic growth in the history of this country. And yet, by all metrics, we're incredibly hardworking. We're the most educated generation to be a part of this country. And yet we're the most jaded and cynical. And I wanted to talk about that. So, that's Klein's part of it.
Yes. And then there's Rain's part of it as well, which is kind of the more traditional side, like where you're trying to make it yourself, and there's all the hurdles you have to go through because there's no money in it, and you have to figure out how to survive while trying to make yourself, to that point.
Right. And so, and I've said this before in some other podcasts, but it's so important that, Rain started out as a bit character. I needed somebody for Klein who was not affiliated with the band or the industry, at least initially. I needed someone to bounce dialogue off of. And Klein's a bit of an addict, and he lives at a bar, and she was a bartender. And so her creation was simply a sounding board for him to have conversation and talk about his feelings. And then the more I wrote her, the more I said, okay, well, maybe I have a love interest here. And then I kept writing, and I said, well, now they need to have something in common. Well, wouldn't it be cool if, like, she is also an artist? And then, okay, well, what if she's an artist that sees an opportunity to manipulate Klein for her own ends when she's been struggling herself? And so, and eventually the book became about her. And while everybody orbits Klein and the story is driven by Klein and Aberdeen, quietly Rain becomes the center figure of that. And as I was creating her character, I was doing a lot of research, because as I wrote her, I started having, I became Rain. You have to put yourself in your character's mindset, right? And try to pretend to be her, which is really hard. I'm not really an artist. I'm not a woman. I've never struggled a day in my life, not like most people have. But I started thinking, well, how would she feel about Klein, who has this golden parachute, right? He falls into it. He hates it. How would she feel about that if she's out here grinding away to make it? And so I started doing a lot of research, and it turned out, I started asking questions. Why wouldn't she be successful? Well, Zach, what female artists do you really respect and like? Well, I don't really like a lot of them. I'll listen to them. I listen to Hole. I listen to Hard. I listen to the Pretty Reckless, and I appreciate them, but they're not, they're not my favorite. And so I started saying, is it possible that you are predispositioned to not like women in rock and roll because you don't want to hear them talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll from their perspective? And the answer was yes. That was it. And then I started saying, okay, well, why aren't there more successful women in this industry? Because there's not that many. And why do they only have like a 10-year period? And I started answering my own questions, right? And so that's when the book became about Rain and the Painted Queens.
Yeah, and I mean, when you ask that question, I'm thinking the same thing. And like, Paramore is one of my favorite bands, but outside of that, same thing. Like, you listen, even going back to the other side of the story, but let's do a girl's perspective. When Linkin Park had the female come in, how much negative attention that brought to Linkin Park at first because of exactly what you're saying. Like, she's a female artist. Do people just not respect that side of it? So it's an interesting kind of parallel to that with the other questions of like building or being born into that kind of thing. Like, are you put into that situation, or you kind of have to build that situation?
Yeah, it's fascinating for me to look at, even the successful women in rock and roll right now. And so I started listening to a lot of podcasts, specifically some with Ann Wilson, You know, I've listened to a lot of Courtney Love, and you know, people can think whatever they want about Courtney Love, and I think the jury's still out on a lot of that. But why, you know,
Speaking of conspiracy theories,
sure,
right?
yeah. So you know, but one thing like was really certain to me was that they're held to a different standard of perfection, and you know, so if you have two equally talented rock stars and one's a woman and one's a man, I mean, just look at the grunge movement. Uh, Female bassists were very, very common in the grunge movement, Smashing Pumpkins, right? Even like Rob Zombie, you know, so we got tons of those, but you know, you rarely ever saw them. And the ones that are successful have to continue to push the envelope with their sexuality. So look at somebody, you know, like Taylor Momsen and the Pretty Reckless, or Lizzie Hale from Hailstorm, on how they're continually having to push that envelope just to stay relevant. Now that's Zach's opinion. That's not fact, but you know, that was really fascinating to me. So I wanted to create a band that knew that going in. Like they were like, they want us to push our sexuality. Let's push it. Let's make it undeniable. This is, if you want, you know, a group of all female that are women on stage, and you don't think that we're good enough, I'm going to make you listen to them because I'm going to make you watch me, right? So I'm going to flaunt my sexuality. I'm going to push that. So that's kind of that was the impetus for that.
So how long were you researching things like this before you actually put pen to paper? Was this during the writing process that you're looking up like these different female leads and different artists and different like stories that kind of run parallel to what you were writing?
So, you know, honestly, when I first started writing, I wasn't doing any research. I was just coming from the heart. And like I said, that was coming from the heart because I was writing Klein. It wasn't until Rain really became kind of center on that. And just to be perfectly honest with you, a lot of it I knew already because I have such a love for the music industry. But I really started doing more research for my second book. That's really when I started like digging in because, you know, Echoes is world building. You're introducing characters, you're introducing stakes. You know, you're setting the tone. Mirrors becomes far deeper. It's my Empire Strikes Back. It's my Two Towers. And that's when I really started doing a ton of research for like, hey, every day on the way home, I'm not going to listen to, you know, Alice in Chains. I'm not going to listen to, you know, all the stuff that I normally listen to. I'm going to put on a podcast with people, like I said, whether it's, you know, Courtney Love or Ann Wilson or whomever, women that have lived it. And Courtney Love was such an interesting one because she's really, I'm not going to say she influences my decisions with Rain, but Courtney Love is fascinating because she knew how to play the game. And she said, you made up your mind who I was before I ever made it. So I'm just going to be the person that you think I am. And so that's what she did.
When someone finally finishes this book, what do you hope sticks with them the most coming out of it?
Well, the biggest thing for me is to make them want to pick up Mirrors. And I left Echoes on such a massive plot twist and cliffhanger inside the epilogue that people that do finish it, that's going to be the first thing. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from my readers on that, on like, how could you do that to me? But more importantly, for them, it was, you did it right in front of me the entire time and hit it. So now I want to go back and reread it. And that for me, that is the best compliment that an author can get is that I hit something from them, that it was that kind of, or, you know, life changing in terms of reading a book of like, wow, you made me want to continue to read the story, because without that, without them wanting to read the rest of these books, then none of it matters. But in terms of Echoes itself, you know, one of the things that I wanted people to think of, there's really two major, platforms that I wanted to talk about. One is the generational struggle of my generation, a generation that by and large, you know, like I talked about earlier, of like, we've never been great in anything. We've never had, we didn't have our Great War. We didn't have World War II. We didn't have an economic boom. We didn't have any of these things. But what we did have was 9/11. What we did have was Katrina. What we did have was a war in Afghanistan. All we have known for our entire adult lives, for most of us starting the day that we were 18, is struggle. And I'm not trying to say that we're worse off than any other generation. I'm saying that, like, we simply look around and say, what are we great at? What is our moment? And so if you open the first pages of Echoes, you know, my quote that I have there specifically speaks to that this is for the generation that's still trying to find greatness. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was what we've already talked about, was the commodification of women in rock and roll, and to change, at least make us think about their artistry.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's something we've had female leads on here as well because I feel the same way. Like their voices, not their voices aren't heard, but they're just like you said earlier, like when people think of their favorite bands, it's like all male driven bands. And why isn't something like Paramore more towards the top of people's list? I mean, they're a fantastic band. They've been around for 20 years and I mean, they have hits every single time. Paramore is one of my favorite bands. So when I was reading a lot of this stuff, that's kind of where my mind drove to was something like that because that's female driven. She's been around forever. She's on a lot of pop songs, but unless she's on a pop song, people don't really know Haley Williams. You know what I
Correct.
mean?
Hmm.
Like when you think of Paramore, you don't, now you do, but I'm 10 years ago, you thought Paramore, you didn't immediately think of Haley Williams. But if you thought of like, I don't know, Airplanes by B.O.B., you thought Haley Williams because her name is actually on the song itself. So giving her more like recognition and giving her more flowers basically like that.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
it's a really interesting perspective, really interesting thought. Did you ever play in a band or try to play in a band? I know you said a lot of this was because you didn't really go to live music, but you were very into music growing up.
Yeah. So my dad was a musician. He still is. He had a bluegrass band for most of my childhood. So I spent a ton of time, uh, watching him play. I actually played cello at a very, very high level up until high school and was my director, and, uh, I was really making waves at that point where, I was the youngest, member in the symphonic, uh, orchestra for Huntsville Metropolitan Youth Orchestra. And my director pulled me and my mom to the side, one day and said, Zach is not practicing. He's using all talent to keep up, and there are other people that are working really, really hard and far harder than he is. He needs to make a decision between sports and music. And he said, I already know what that choice is, so I think he needs to go focus on his sports. And that was the wrong move by me. Now, I don't misunderstand. I loved playing football, soccer, baseball, wrestle. I did kind of everything, um, in high school and had some opportunities, to continue that. But, I can't. I mean, I could go play those now, but that'd be ill advised. But, so I gave up music, and so by the time I wanted to pick it back up, in my 20s, I don't have the patience for that. I wanted to get a bass and be John Bonham, for Led Zeppelin, or I wanted to play Soundgarden, and that's something that takes years to hone that craft. And so I would turn on the music and I start playing, and I'm like, I can't do this, right? I'm just not that good. So I just kind of gave up on it. Haven't had a lot of time to go back to it. I mean, I do plan on it, but right now writing about it is just as much fun. I go to so many shows that the one thing that I wanted to do with my series that I don't think anybody has done well, whether it's Daisy Jones or any other books about, rock and roll, is I wanted to make performances the backbone. I wanted people to be able to live that moment. I didn't want to say, oh, they got on stage and they played their 45-minute set and he did this and she did that and they looked at each other, whatever. I wanted people to feel it from the artist perspective, and what I've seen on stage when I've seen all my favorite bands play.
Yeah, it's funny. I relate with that story very much. I played piano, drums, trumpet, a bunch of things growing up, and then I got into baseball, and I kind of dropped them all. And then I got into my 20s, and I'm like, man, I shouldn't have stopped playing piano.
Right.
Like I should have kept going through that because now I really wish I could play the piano.
Absolutely.
And sometimes little bits and pieces come back, but nothing spectacular.
Yep.
Just small things. So what's next for you? Do you have any other books that you're working on now, or any other pieces of literature?
I do. So, I think I have maybe 5 or 6 other, books in this series and some piece or some part of development. Mirrors is one, like I said, it's Echoes, make no mistake. It's a dense book. It requires readers to really pay attention. There's so much that's hidden in there. There's so many references that matter. And for me, I don't use pop culture references lightly. Every song that's referenced, every show or movie that's referenced, it all means something. Every lyric, and it's a dense book. But Mirrors is far darker. It gets a lot deeper. So, I've been going back and forth with it, right? So, I sent it to be edited. It came back, done. And I said, no, I think I can do better than that. And I've sent it back to the editor 2 or 3 times at this point. And every time I get it back, I'm like, no, I can do better. I can do better because I've learned so many lessons from Echoes to this one. But I have many more. Like, I know where the series is going. I have a prequel and a sequel that have already been kind of sketched out. I do have some ideas for science fiction that eventually one day I'm going to get to. And then I have an idea that I think everybody's going to love. And I guess this is the first time I've talked with anybody about it other than friends and family. I have an idea for a book called Skinsuit, and it centers around 3 different doodles that I have owned. And through their eyes, they span 3 different generations. Through their eyes, I'm going to explore a lot of human condition and the things that we deal with, whether it's racism, sexism, reproductive rights, immigration, and don't like I'm not left, I'm not right. I'm a person that just looks and watches. And I try to apply my own morality to it. And so I thought that this would be a fantastic idea to not tell people they're right or wrong, but to look at it from a dog's perspective. How do animals, like, what do they think, right? And I think it's going to be a fascinating book that people are going to love, especially considering that these animals are foul mouthed. They're quite literal and dark because death is a part of their everyday existence, whether they're talking to cows, armadillos, deer, whatever. They all have their different experiences, but they just look at life completely different than us. And I'm really excited about exploring that through their eyes.
And where can people find updates on this kind of stuff? Where can people find you on social media?
So you can find me on Instagram, on TikTok at Zach Taylor Books, and then on Facebook it's Zach Taylor Author. Funny enough, I had gotten away from social media before I decided to be a published author for a lot of the same reasons that I was just talking about with my book. I want to, with Skinsuit. So I got away from social media. That's the wrong thing to do when you're an indie author, because that's such a huge weapon for you. So we're trying to build that back. So, please go follow me. We're going to start, we're really focusing on Echoes right now because, we got to get enough traction with it to really be able to afford going forward. Again, I could dump it into one of the automated processes and it will generate me a book, but that's not the experience that I want. And anybody that picks up Echoes from the first page in, you're going to see that formatting, all the thoughts that went into it, the blank pages, which I'm sure that you've seen. There was so much that went into that. In order to do that, all those type of things, they cost money and they cost time, and I want to produce art. So, Echoes has to be successful to an extent for us to really press forward on that if we want to do it the way we want to do it. So that's how you find me on social media.
And you can find Echoes on Amazon or any bookstore. What bookstores are you going to find it at?
Right. So you can go on you can go to Barnes & Noble, you can go to Books A Million, you can go to Amazon, and certainly always go to your local bookstore. And while we're mostly centered around Huntsville, Florence, and Tuscaloosa right now, I have a big event coming up in Tuscaloosa. Even though I'm an Auburn fan, I don't really like going to Tuscaloosa. My wife's family's from there, and I love them, and I love that area. So you can find it anywhere there, but I do ask that, if you support your local independent bookstore, they may not have it, but you can always ask. You can always ask, and they will happily order it for you.
And you can find all those links below if you're not going to the bookstore. If you want to order it online, you can find those below. But go to that local bookstore and grab it.
Absolutely.
If you have that. Zach, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck on the books coming up. You got a lot coming up here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Zach, for being here. Thank you all for listening. Again, make sure you subscribe if you're not already. YouTube down below. Anywhere else, hit that follow button, 5 stars. If you're going to be at Comicpalooza or you think you want to go to Comicpalooza, hit me up. I will be there, and I would love to say hi to you. Make sure you follow us on social media at MadPropsPod on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. You can follow me at Chris.Schnabel on TikTok or at Chris Schnabel on Instagram. I usually collab, so if you're already Mad Props, you can find me. It's pretty simple. I'm in the bios of both of them. You can find me there if you would like. Make sure you check out some of our old episodes. We've had a lot of great guests go on so far, a couple of good solo episodes. Momo Sonogo was on last week. We had a baseball one the week before that. Ava Bunn was on before that. She just finished up the first new season of Scrubs, so you're going to want to go ahead and check that out. Make sure you look at Sketching Up Podcast. We have a new podcast coming out every week on Friday. Go check out the Crosstown 9 podcast. Comes out every week on Monday. What did I say? Friday, Monday. Those are correct. Both of those are correct. Again, check me out, Comicpalooza. I will be there, and I want to see you guys there as well. If you are going to be at, not Anime Fest, can't remember what it is. If you guys are going to be in Dallas for the Comic-Con, that's going to be there. I'll find it in a second. I'll have someone send it to me. Make sure you check me out. I'm going to be there on Saturday as well. Come say hi to me. NostalgiaCon. If you're going to be at NostalgiaCon May 2nd, that is the Saturday. Hit me up. I'll be there as well. I'd love to say hi. A couple of our guests will be there, so make sure you say hi to them and tell them you listen to them on Mad Props. Rob Paulson's going to be there. Matt Hill is going to be there at Ed and Eddie fame. Go ahead and check them out as well. If you haven't already downloaded that book when you were listening to Zach, or bought that book when you were listening to Zach, head to your local bookstore and pick it up, or go to Amazon right now. Link is in the bio, and buy that book for yourself. You're not going to want to miss a single page of that thing. It is a good one to listen. I like to listen to. I keep saying listening because I like listening to books personally. That's just what I usually do. But you can read it as well, like normal people do, if you want. But go ahead and check that out. Thank you guys so much. We will see you next week. This has been Mad Props. We got a really fun guest next week. I can't wait to share it with you. But you'll have to wait until then. See you later. Thank you guys so much. Peace.